Hello and welcome to another Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig, joined as always by Andrew. Today, finally, is Turnstile week. You're not going to get a Turnstile minute or a moment.
This week in Turnstile?
You're not going to get this week in Turnstile, except, I guess this entire week is this week in Turnstile. Never Enough was released on Friday last week. We've listened to it a billion times already, and we are ready to talk about it. How's it going, Andrew?
Today in Turnstile, I am doing quite well. Very excited to talk about this album.
So first off, how disappointed are you?
It was crushing.
So in previous episodes when we've talked about a record, specifically one we were excited about, we ended up going kind of track by track by track. And I don't think that's really where we're going to go today, because there's just so much conversation about this band, this record, but more importantly, kind of what it means, what it doesn't mean, who they are, who they're not. Are they hardcore? What is hardcore? And everything in between. And it's not unlike conversations we've had before with other bands. I mean, even as recently as even in Arcadia by Sleep Token. Are they a metal band? Are they a pop band? Are they? Who knows, right?
Yep.
The difference here, and probably where we should start, is at the beginning, because there's just no denying the fact that Turnstile is a hardcore band, has been a hardcore band, and whether or not this is a hardcore record, they are a hardcore band.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no debating. They have cemented their place. They put in their dues. They've put out some of the most essential hardcore albums ever created. And yeah, it's become like almost exhausting and cliche to talk about how exhausted you are about this conversation. And, it's
I'm
like,
looking forward to having the conversation.
Backlash to the backlash, but you can't avoid it because this conversation is happening everywhere. And this is kind of what happens when I think a band sort of redefines the roots that they grew up out of, and they move on into like becoming something else in a way. And the way I'll equate it to my personal life, I had one of my absolute best friends in college. He and I had, very similar backgrounds in computers and marketing and doing websites and things like that. And we both ended up working for people at the same company. We didn't work for the same company. It's complicated, but doesn't matter. But anyways, my buddy then it's a commercial real estate company. And eventually, after a couple of years on the job, my buddy decided he was going to get his license to try to become an agent, a commercial real estate agent. And I remember at the time feeling like I didn't understand it. I was like, yeah, but this is what you love, like doing this. Like, what? There's no way you're going to be happy doing that.
And you've changed your identity. This is not who you are.
Yeah. And a part of me, it was almost a jealousy thing. Like he was evolving past me. Like I was stuck still in the same thing, which I'm still doing, 20 years later. But I remember that feeling of like, it just felt like he was changing into something different. And I almost resented that. And I almost think that's sort of similar to what happens all the time in music. Bands come up in a scene, they develop a fan base, a reputation, and everybody's comfortable in that. But when the band starts to morph outside of that and color outside of those lines, I think a lot of people do worry, like, oh, are we being left behind? Rather than just going along for the ride with them. And that's I think, at the most basic level, sort of the underlying thing of what's happening with Turnstile. And you watch any of these shows that they're putting on and you tell me that's not a hardcore band. Like, come on, give me a break. It just happens to be the biggest hardcore band in the world right now. And, I guess there's a debate to be had about whether Never Enough is a quote unquote hardcore album, which I don't necessarily even think it is. I think I'd be fine to say it's not. And I just don't care about that. But to say Turnstile isn't a hardcore band still, to me, is just ridiculous.
Well, let's talk about the live show in particular, because that was one of the things that occurred to me as I was preparing for this conversation. Is I have seen those videos. They are hardcore shows, and these songs come off as hardcore songs in that setting where they're playing live. What I found with the recording, which I love, by the way, I think it's a great record, is that they took a lot of the hardcore out in the production, in the presentation on the record. But I think where a lot of bands are always trying to capture who they are live in the studio, it's almost like Turnstile finally realized that they were never going to be able to capture what it means to be in a hardcore show with those crazy pits and the stage diving and everything else. And they said, all right, we're going to zag while everybody else is zigging. And we're going to make the prettiest, most opulent alternative rock record we ever possibly could, while still staying true to our instruments. But even the vocals, I think, are way backed off and melodic compared to what he performs live. And so they are a hardcore band that made probably the best alternative rock record of this year and maybe the last few years.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's a part of me that it thinks it's like, okay, I'll get into this. Like, so the detractors of this album generally have fallen into two camps. Like, this is not a universally loved album, so it is a little polarizing, and the people who don't like it, really primarily that I've seen, have fallen into one of two camps. The people who say this isn't a hardcore album, and Glow On was at least a hardcore album still. I could still get down with that. This is not a hardcore album. They've left hardcore behind. I don't like this album. The other camp that I've seen is this is Glow On 2.0. And I have to say, like, it's really funny, like, that these are the two camps because they contradict each other. Like, if Glow On is a hardcore album and this is not a hardcore album, well, how can this be Glow On 2.0, And that's where there's like an enigmatic nature to this album and what it is. Because here's the thing. A lot of these songs sound like Glow On albums in parts. Or, I like the chorus of Soul, the second song on the album, is the exact same vocal melody. And even like the breakdown of the syllables is exactly the same as Endless from Glow On. Exactly the same. Like, I was listening to it, I'm like, wait, did they just put Endless on this? But then you get to that chorus of Soul, and it turns into something they've never done before, a chorus like that. So, like, there's all these moments that you could hear parts. Like, yes, the chord progression to Never Enough feels a little bit like the chord progression of Mystery. But the song could not be more different in what they attempt to do, particularly, as album openers. And it's like you can dissect these moments by moments, and you can find these things. But like, I think that this is part of the genius of what Turnstile does. Like, they are so genuinely true to themselves that they have a sound, and that you're going to hear things that sound just like it. And I've got a little game for anybody who thinks that this is a new thing with Turnstile. Put every single Turnstile song prior to Glow On and Never Enough. So, the Pressure to Succeed, Step to Rhythm, Nonstop Feeling, Time and Space. Put all that in a playlist in Spotify, Apple Music, whatever you use. Put it on random and don't look at the track names, and just start skipping through and try to think of what song it is when it plays. Because I promise you, there's a bunch of them where you have to stop and think about it because you're not sure which Turnstile song they are, because they sound pretty similar. This is a byproduct of hardcore. Like, hardcore in and of itself, like, has a defined sound. And that's why people are arguing over what is and isn't hardcore, because if you don't sound the same, you can't be hardcore. So, like,
which is hysterical, by the way, because this was another one of my, I was looking for the weirdest comparisons that I could make in music. And one of the things that I don't like about blues is that it follows a format and a function, so that all blues songs essentially. They don't all sound the same, but they all kind of sound like
They
blues songs.
Yeah, they have
And
that
so
feeling from the blues
not all
scale.
hardcore songs sound the same, but all hardcore songs sound like hardcore songs.
Yeah.
And they're defying the genre, and they're defying the convention. But also there are some pieces in there that don't defy the convention. So
Yep.
I'm with you on that one.
That's the meat on the bone, if you will, you know.
Yeah.
And like the thing I really appreciate about this approach to what they did with this album is they are so both unassuming and unapologetic about it. Like I've watched every interview I could find with them, and they've done quite a bit of press this time around compared
Yeah.
to previous years. And they don't talk about this as like an artistic statement that they were trying to make. They're very clear about what their goal is with this. It was not to push any boundaries whatsoever. Um, their goal was just to make the music that they wanted to make right now and where they are as a band. And
with the equity that they had from Glow On and the time and space that granted them, with the band as it existed in the moment that they were creating it, which you and I will probably talk about in terms of the slight change in lineup. And I don't mean to say slight as in like it's not important, but you know, they, to your point, I don't feel like there was an agenda other than let's all get together and make a record we feel like making.
Yeah. And like I think there are moments and songs on this album that are absolute statements, and they are statements sometimes of like to me, like a song like Birds is still like the ultimate, like, you know what, we can still do the best form of classic traditional hardcore that we can do. But you know, like there's so many other like a song like Light Design is an absolute statement in a totally different direction. Why am I forgetting the name? Already forgetting the name of the song. I'm so bad with song names, but the one that they did on Fallon, I Care.
I Care.
A song like I Care to me absolutely is a statement. And by the way, since we're here, can we talk about the fact that like because that's the first time I heard that song and they ended it on Fallon with Doll right after it. It annoys me that those songs aren't back to back on the album. Like if I have a complaint about I Care, they sort of seemed on the album almost to not know how to end it. It doesn't really have much of an ending. And I think you famously talk about that with like Corduroy a lot. Like they on the album, they didn't really know how to figure or how to end it, and they've figured it out on the live shows. And I kind of think that could be the case with this, where all they need to do is put something that just drops the hammer at the end. And Doll is like the perfect way to do it. They've done it. I know they did it at the Brooklyn show they did on the record release show. They played it live that way. I'm not sure if they played it at the festival show they did in Spain. But anyways, I would expect to see them do that quite a bit live because it works so well. But anyways, my point, going back to my original point though, like there are these like statement moments that like showcase what a unique band this is. And like I struggle sometimes to like come up with the right words and how to say this the right way, because I love traditional hardcore. Like, they Knocked Loose, Drain, who's just announced a new album coming out, excuse me, Combust, like on and on and on. I mean, too many to name.
And don't forget Scowl.
Well, Scowl's a little different because they're also kind of doing the same thing Turnstile's doing, which is sort of change it within. I'm saying if you want like the traditional old school hardcore sound, that's out there for you. And I love all of those bands. All those bands that put out awesome albums over the last several years. So none of this is a slight at hardcore as a scene, which I love, but it just is special and unique for these two things to be happening at the same time. One, you have a band totally like just going to another level artistically and like I said, I truly believe that this is something that's just happening naturally, but they are just at their peak right now in creativity. And that's happening at the same time as a very sizable audience is noticing that. And those two things don't usually happen together. And we've talked about this, like, this is why a lot of times, like, the rock bands who get super popular tend to be the type of bands that everybody hates. Like, yeah, and I mean, I'm using that flippantly because obviously, in order for them to get
I
huge,
think
lots
you're
of people
right.
love them. But like, a lot of the traditional, like, music, like rock fans, hate those bands that do that because they don't necessarily always have the artistic expression that's working in the way that it is right now with Turnstile. This band has made so many decisions over these last 4, 5, 6 years. In like every single one has been a home run. Every decision they are making seems to be the right decision right now. And those two things happening at the same time has led to this unique situation that I've never seen in my life. And I think it could be a long time before we see a band like Turnstile become as popular as they've become.
Well, let's talk about it in relation to Knocked Loose, because you and I spent a lot of time talking about Knocked Loose last year, where they kind of broke open to new heights for a hardcore band, but they did it by continuing to play very traditional hardcore music, some very the same abrasive screaming vocals that they've always done. And so it's interesting just to compare and contrast between a band that welcomed a giant audience to hardcore by doing a variation on kind of the same old thing, and then versus
But
what
better.
Turnstile is doing,
but better.
Absolutely.
Knocked Loose album, they were perfect in their execution on that album, and that's why it's such a great album.
Yeah, and I think it probably, whereas they brought in some kind of metal and metalcore type fans who might be a little bit less punky, and I think that's why it probably worked for me a little bit more than some of the traditional hardcore. Like you mentioned, which band did you mention that I don't care about? Drain. Yeah, Drain. I will never like Drain because I do not like the vocals. I don't like it. And that's not a shot at them or what they do. That's my personal preference. But it is interesting to me that, where they both are kind of accomplishing similar things, yes, at different levels.
Yeah.
But Turnstile changed a lot more. I think it's fair to say.
Without a doubt. And, in the Stereo Gum premature evaluation that Eli, I forget what his last name is. Eli Ennis wrote. And it's a great piece. He's
really from Pittsburgh, but we won't hold that against him.
Yeah. But, he kind of talked about this a little bit too, that he was saying how he sort of took exception to people saying that, Turnstile is bringing hardcore to the masses because Turnstile doesn't sound like anything else that's going on in the hardcore scene.
Right.
And he's right about that. He's 1000% right about that. Knocked Loose did way more to spread hardcore to the masses than Turnstile has. But my counter to that, though, is the difference is Turnstile is trying to bring the masses to hardcore. And that's a different trick. So instead of bringing hardcore to the masses, they're bringing the masses to hardcore. And the reason this is so important to me is because of the type of music fan I am and how I grew up. I've talked about this before. I grew up in rural Northwest Ohio, a small town of like 10,000 people. We only had one music store, and it was a big, giant chain. You weren't going to get underground punk music at this store. I didn't know that underground punk was a thing. And then I heard Rancid and I heard Green Day, and I fell in love with those bands because they were so different from everything else I was hearing. And through them, they brought me to punk because I followed them and went backwards and found their influences and where they grew up and who they were playing with. I found hardcore through that process, eventually led me to hardcore. And so it matters to me that we don't slight Turnstile for doing this. I think that's important work that's so desperately needed. If you look at, like, again, another point Eli made, he's like, well, you know, you don't see Turnstile shirts at other hardcore bands' shows. And that's true. But I will also tell you something. You will never see diversity at any other hardcore show like you see at a Turnstile show. Like watching all these videos and seeing Instagram pictures and people sharing stuff on Twitter. Like you look at all these pictures, the different types of people I have seen, different races, different genders, different ages, weight, sizes, like all of that. Like everybody is welcome at a Turnstile show, and you feel that openness and that welcoming, that communal spirit of what they do. And I talked about this going back to Glow On, even like how it felt like they were trying to create a more welcoming environment for people. And that's fine. If you're a hardcore fan that scoffs at that, that's your right. Like you're entitled to like what you like. And if you're not in for this, if this isn't your thing, that's cool. But for me, I can't help, because of the type of music fan I am, to just be so drawn to this idea of doing something that is both creative and artistically pure and genuine to me, and doing it well, and getting a huge number of people to take notice and maybe figure it out. And you look at this, they just announced their tour lineup today. You know, when you've got Blood Orange, you know, on the ticket with them, Jane Remover, like you're going after different audiences. You know, the Mannequin Pussy and Emil and the Sniffers, like, and Speed, like those bands, like they're going to be in the same realm more or less. But you're inviting lots of different types of music fans to the show, and hoping you can translate that and get that. And I think it's only a positive. I think there'll be plenty of people who'll discover things that they like in the hardcore scene because of this. And even the ones who don't, that's fine too, because, you know, at least we've got this Turnstile experience, which is so unique and so special to me.
Well, and I think one of the things that is a constant theme for you and me on this podcast is that we're not big fans of gatekeeping in any way, shape, or form. And we're also, as long as it feels authentic and artistic, we're going to give bands, especially bands that we trust, the room to kind of do their things. But I do think that it's fair for hardcore fans to criticize this record as bringing in the wrong kinds of people who will never fall in love with hardcore. But I also think there's something to be said for bringing those people into that environment that you and I have both said is absolutely the aesthetic of hardcore. It goes beyond the music, because anybody who thinks that hardcore is just a musical style and it's not about the community, it's not about the aesthetic and the way the crowds interact with the band on stage and the way the band interacts with their audience, and you know, there's a nobility to it. And I think bringing that vibe, even more so than a strict musical style, is culturally super cool. I don't know if it's important. You said it's important and it's vital, and you didn't say vital, but I think you were intimating it. And I don't even know if I would go that far. I don't think I need to go that far, but I think it's cool. I think it's cool, and I have no problem with it. I'm excited to see how this tour unfolds. I really would like to go to a show and see the way this material comes off live. You know, it's fun to watch YouTube videos, but unless it's like in your actual face, you don't really get to experience it.
Yeah, like the song "No Surprise" on Glow On talked about this, you know, and though it comes as no surprise to me, if you don't want to look inside of me, you really got to see it live to get it. And I think like every review of Glow On talked about that line. You really got to see it live to get it. And I do think like that's always been a huge aspect of hardcore. Like I think you nailed that dead on. Like, yes, hardcore is a sound, it is a musical genre, but it's more than that. And it is that live experience of these clubs and just kids losing their freaking minds at these hardcore shows. Like, that's all part of the aesthetic, and that matters, and that's important. But like, I guess what the reason why why I say it's important is that I think that what happens is, like, you can't just count on, like, okay, we're gonna bring every person who comes to a Turnstile show is suddenly going to be a fan of hardcore. Like, that's not how that's going to work.
No.
You have to cast a wide net and funnel all these people through and find the ones who will resonate. But like, what I care about is, like, I want like 16-year-old kids, 20-year-old kids going to a Turnstile show being like, holy shit, like, there's something happening here. Fall in love with that
and chase that feeling.
They can go into that hardcore scene. Then maybe they don't like it. Maybe they're not going to like Knocked Loose. Maybe they're not going to like Drain. But what if they find certain aspects of those bands that they do like, and they take those out? And that's where the creativity spreads. I think hardcore, I don't remember who talked about this, but somebody talked about this, that, you know, for the longest time, hardcore suddenly became stagnant, and it didn't always used to be that way. And it has become sort of stagnated because of these rules. Like, you can't color outside the lines and still be hardcore. But like, I love bands who push on those boundaries of what hardcore is. That's why I love Scowl. That's why I love Soul Glow. That's why I love Turnstile. Like, these bands that aren't afraid to step over that line and say, hey, we're going to do things a little different. So if we can get more kids going to these shows and falling in love with it and finding different elements that they like and blending it with the things that their friends are enjoying in school, and we get more bands pushing these elements, I love it. Not every hardcore fan has to. I just love it. I want more creativity. I want more artistic expression. I want people to look at these bands that, you know, again, Turnstile, Scowl, look at these bands as beacons of inspiration for what you can do inside of this genre.
Well, and one of the things that I talked about over the last couple of years was one of the best concerts I went to was Arm's Length. And they happened to be in Cleveland tonight. And in all their ads for all their shows, they always talk about, you know, whether or not the club has a barrier between the stage and the band. And they say, no barrier tonight, no barrier tonight. And that's very much like a hardcore thing, because they want to have that sense of community, even if they're not a hardcore band. That is a hardcore aesthetic.
Yes.
And so I do think that aesthetic is really, really important beyond the content of the record itself or the music itself. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is just this record itself and how much it reminds me of non-hardcore records I've ever heard. The one thing, and I Googled it just to see if I was the first one who ever came up with this, and of course I'm not. You know, you try and have an original thought, but everybody's talking all the time. You're never going to have an original thought.
Sure.
I think this is the best Jane's Addiction record I've ever heard.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
But somebody compared Glow On to Jane's Addiction sometime back in 2020 or 2021. So I missed the boat on that one. But I went back and I listened to Ritual de lo Habitual this week, and it doesn't sound like Glow On, but the vocals and the production, it's like if Jane's Addiction made a record today, I think it would sound very much from a production standpoint like Never Enough.
Yeah. I wonder, like, I had thought about that. I was like, I wonder how many hardcore bands, if they had a budget like what Turnstile probably had for this album, would make stuff that sounds somewhat similar. Like, when suddenly you can push the boundaries inside of the studio of what you can. And Pat McCrory, the guitar player for Turnstile, talked about that a little bit in one of the videos. Or one of the interviews I saw, he talked about the fact that, like, you know, previously they felt like a pressure, he would say, to, you know, hurry up, you're in the studio, you got to get these done. You know, you're
time
on that tight
is
deadline.
money.
And so you got to get it done. And he said for the first time, he felt like as a band, they really had the time to stretch their legs and really like play around with the settings and see, like, well, what happens if we push this tone and pull back on that tone. Okay, well, now we've got this tone dialed in, but now this tone doesn't sound quite right. So we need to dial in that tone to match this tone. And you've got all these textures and flavors happening that they never could have done if they didn't have, I mean, who knows what their budget actually was, but I promise you, they had a pretty comfortable budget to make this album. You can tell in the way it sounds.
Not to mention the amount of technological advance there's been in studio, even since 2012 or 2013, when they were making some of their biggest breakout records.
Yeah, and that's certainly true too. But I think like the thing that's remarkable about that is, and you really have to give a lot of kudos to Roadrunner. I think that a lot of labels would have been like, well, okay, here's your budget, but you have to work with this or this producer. Like, here's the list. You pick the producer, but it's got to be one of these guys. And they let Brendan Yates produce this himself. Now, he did bring Will Yip on to help, but by all accounts, from hearing other members of the band say it, this is pretty much Brendan Yates producing this on his own. And
the other component, by the way, is time. And yes, they've been touring, and they've been they opened for Blink 182. They've had some unbelievable opportunities in the wake of Glow On. But I mean, Glow On was released August of 2021, and it's now June of 2025. That is a long lead time to wait when you've really struck gold with your previous record. And so,
for sure,
again kudos to Roadrunner for giving them that time and that space to do that.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
But I think that Brendan producing this also really helped this. Like, I keep coming back to this feeling that to me, and I don't know if everybody would agree with this, but like, to me, this feels like Turnstile really being themselves. They've gone through several different iterations, but like they've never really, like, they've always added wrinkles with each step of the progression along the way, but it always felt like they were chasing something to me a little bit. And this is the album where I just didn't feel like they were chasing it. Like, I feel like they just let it happen. And I don't know, I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know the inner workings of the band exactly. I infer things from these interviews and things that they talk. So what I'm getting at here is the lineup change. I think a lot of people who were super into Turnstile, going way back to Pressure to Succeed, Step to Rhythm, and Nonstop Feeling, like, those fans, I think, are the fans that really had the hardest time with Brady being removed from the band. Whatever happened there, I truly have no idea. I've heard a few whispers, rumors here and there, but I don't know for sure what happened there. But Brady leaving the band did change a big part of their identity because of Brady being the lead guitarist. And I think that he wrote a lot of the most traditional sounding hardcore riffs for the band. I think that the riffs that Brendan and Pat wrote tended to be the ones that were coloring more outside the lines. And why do I think that? Because this is the first album they did without Brady, and it sounds completely different, and it sounds loaded with the type of coloring outside the lines things that they used to dabble in, and now they did it full time. And I love the shift to Pat as the lead guitar player. I wasn't sure about it. Like, I was apprehensive when Brady left the band. I really was. I was like, oh, I don't know what's about to happen. And the first couple shows they played with somebody else filling in at guitar, I didn't love it. It didn't feel right. Well, then once they moved Pat to, and what they were doing was Pat was still doing the rhythm. They brought in this other guy to do the lead. So once Pat slid over to the lead guitar, and then obviously bringing in Meg. Meg did not play on this album, but she, she's been playing these songs live. Like their connection to me seems so much stronger. The way those two play guitar feels so much stronger. Like I have always felt like there's been a little bit of a disconnect in the type of players that Brady and Pat are. And so that works better. But on this record, it's just Pat doing all the guitars. And you get some of the coolest sounding guitar parts that Turnstile's ever done. Like there's a richness, a spatial like warmth to some of these parts that he's playing. I love the adventureness of it, and I just think that this lineup change has allowed them to become themselves and stop chasing something. Again, I'm probably projecting too much there, but you know what? I'm a music fan and I've done this my whole life. That's what I do. I project and, sort of infuse my own thoughts into my own headcanon. So that's what I'm going to do.
Well, and on top of it, there's hope that maybe this isn't the final destination for this band, and maybe there's another level for them to get to.
Sure.
It's an odd comparison, but I always think about Death Cab, because when Chris Walla left that band, they made a couple of records with kind of the touring musicians not really playing on the records, and Ben Gibbard probably doing too much by himself. And then this last record that they released was Asphalt Meadows, where the guys were made permanent members of the band and participated in the writing and the creation of the music. And shocker, it turned out to be the most complete sounding Death Cab record since Chris Walla left the band, because now all those dynamics were in place. The band seemed like they were creating together again as a cohesive unit. And who knows what this band ends up becoming, with Meg Mills being a cohesive part of the band, in hopefully involved in the writing process over the next record. I hate to fast forward because the record just came out. Could be another 4 years, but
I'm glad you went there. I'm glad you went there, because I did want to make that point though, that I'm actually super excited to hear what it does sound like when Meg does become involved in the process. She's just been, first of all, I do want to say, it can't be easy for her to being drug into all these interviews and have to sit there and have all these questions asked about this album that you didn't get to play on. It's probably not easy. Now, granted, she's in Turnstile now, and that's, she's already won. So, but like, I'm really excited to hear what an album can sound like with Meg, whether that's writing or even just performing on the album. Because like I said, when you see the camaraderie and the way she has fit in with this band from day one, that doesn't always happen. And we see it all the time in music, where a new member comes in, and whether it be personality wise or performance wise, they just, you can tell they don't quite gel right. And that has not been the case with Meg. She's been such a natural fit for them. So I'm excited to hear what an album with her sounds like. We'll probably have to wait another 4 years to get it, but
does it make me sexist that I get a little bit nervous for her on stage with all the people running around and crowd surfing and whatnot?
Yeah. So she talked about that in one of the interviews.
Oh, did she? I didn't hear
it. They had just asked her about what that experience is like, and being in a bigger band but still having some of these shows without the barrier with the fans. And she basically said she loves that energy and the chaos. She did add though, as long as everybody's being respectful. Yeah. And you can really read between the lines what they mean with that. But one of my favorite things is there's a moment in the free show that Turnstile did in Baltimore. I don't remember what song it was, but somebody who came up on stage, it looks like they walked over and reached out and touched Meg. I'm not going to say that it was inappropriately touched. Maybe it was on the shoulder. I didn't see where he touched. You immediately saw Franz run over, put himself in between Meg and the crowd, and he stood there almost being super protective of her in that moment on the stage. I just thought that was a cool moment that just goes to show that's a huge violation of hardcore. Like hardcore, like there's a mutual respect between the audience and the band. Like you're allowed to come up on stage, but don't mess with the band. Like don't touch them, don't run into them, don't knock them over, don't steal a guitar pick from their hands. Like, respect the music and let them play and be human beings. But
I mean, we kept using the word community, and a community has respect, and it doesn't steal from each other. It doesn't knock each other down, etc. But yeah,
exactly. So anyway, I think it's it's really been an interesting dynamic watching this lineup shift, and I do think it's had an impact on the music, and maybe more of a bigger impact than I even anticipated. I truly thought this album was going to sound more like Glow On than it does. Like I don't remember if we talked about it on the podcast, but like when I saw the Glow On cover is pink with, you can barely make out some clouds in it. This album cover, they show it right away, bright blue with a hint of a rainbow in the background. The fonts are the same. The capitalization of it is the same. I was just like, the track Never Enough sounded a little bit like Mystery. And I just really thought we were going to get something that sounded more like Glow On than what we did. And I think the result of this album is in large part because of Pat doing all the guitar duties and presumably Brendan picking up more songwriting. I don't know what the breakdown, because they don't say who specifically writes each song, but it's in there.
But one of the things, and I'm not as much of a scholar of this band as you are, so I'm playing catch up a lot on this stuff. But the kind of is, I don't know if it's a lead or a solo, but the really anthemic guitar part towards the end of Never Enough is unlike anything we heard on Glow On, and it is just, it's soul crushingly beautiful. And one of the things that I love, I probably, because I'm a simpleton, because I'm not a hardcore Turnstile fan, I got to be honest with you, I think I probably like this better than Glow On, which is probably not a surprise to you. And that's not me saying that this is a better record than Glow On. It's just me saying I like it more. Probably because it's got more of that accessibility and a lot of the melodic anthemic things going on. It's very stadium rock, and I'm a sucker for stadium rock, and I'm kind of blown away how infectious this record is for me, because I wasn't expecting it at all.
So I'm glad you went here too, because, and I do, before we wrap up, I do want to talk about.
And by the way, my whole goal today is like to say just enough to get you going for another 3 or 4 minutes. So go.
Okay. I do want, before we wrap this up, to talk about some tracks on this. Like we haven't talked much about individual tracks, and I do want to talk a little bit about that. But the one thing we've kind of hinted around without really talking about, and you finally like maybe touched on it a little bit there, is how do we really feel about this album? Like we really have, like we've said we like it clearly, but like how much do we like it? Like how do we feel about it? And here I'll give my answer first, but I really would like you to
actually let me start first.
Oh, okay.
Because for me, I liked Glow On, and I thought it was really intriguing and interesting, but I thought it was top heavy. I really loved kind of that first 5 or 6. I can't even tell you. The songs blend together. They all belong together on that record. Yeah. And then there's a certain point in Glow On where I'm like, I've kind of had enough. I never, ever reached that point on this record. Man, there's a never enough joke to be had there, but I'm not going to make it. But all the way till Magic Man, I'm engaged all the way through Magic Man, and more often than not, I want to start it over. And Never Enough is so good that I want to hear it again, just to kind of start the whole record over again. So I found myself going in a circle with this record in ways that I never, ever did with Glow On personally.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I mean, Never Enough, the track, is such a triumphant fucking opening song. My God.
A celebration.
Oh, I love it so much. Like, that's like a big part of my inspiration for wanting to listen to this album over and over again is to be able to keep listening to that song. Like, I have not even remotely grown tired of that song.
No,
It's so freaking good. And
the
God,
same way
like,
the same way I felt about Mystery and Blackout. I could listen to
yeah,
those two songs
yeah,
forever
for
and
sure.
ever and never get sick of them.
Yep. And like seeing the clips of the crowd singing the opening before the guitars kick in on Never Enough is what a moment. And I truly hope I get to experience that on this tour. But uh, I'll say it this way. I think I get what you're saying about Glow On. Glow On is a little bit of a samey record from beginning to end. Like, and I know that, like, that's insane to say when you've got songs like Alien Love Call and Underwater Boy, and like, even think like No Surprise, there's nothing like that on this album. Like,
No,
there's breaks within Glow On in moments, but it is like, like when you uh sort of like when you get to like you get to the end of the album, like, you're not in that much of a different place than where you were when you started, I guess is the way to say it. However, having said all that, to me, I actually think Glow On is a perfect album. I think there's nothing misplaced on it. I like what it does from beginning to end, and I'm along for that whole ride. So for me, Glow On, one of the most important albums to me ever made. I love it from beginning to end. It's a perfect album for me. So like, it was always going to be just daunting for any album to top what that album meant to me. But like, the thing is, like, Never Enough, the album, I think I like it better. I really do. I really think I like it better than Glow On. And I don't think Never Enough is a perfect album. I really dislike
no.
Ceiling. That throws me off every time we get to it. And like, it's even placed kind of, I don't know, like,
Thank God it's only a minute.
yeah, but it's like a little bit awkward, even transitioning from Look Out for Me to
Seeing Stars.
Seeing Stars. Like, that's a little bit of an awkward transition for me. Uh, like the flute outro on Sunshower. Like, I don't love that stretch of the album. I'm not a big jazz flute guy, never have been. And so, like, there are moments within here that I'm not like just wowed by, but at the same time, having said all that, like, I think the highs of this album are so much higher than the highs of Glow On. I know that seems sacrilegious to say, but like, I maybe this is where we can start to talk about like some of these tracks, but like, my God, like, for me, like, the stretch of Dreaming, Light Design, and Doll is such a fascinating 3-song stretch that there's nothing like that on Glow. And this is where I just reject the Glow On 2.0 things. The trumpet in Dreaming totally works for me. Like, I love it so much. Light Design with the synthy, like, sort of like synthwave 80s sound, like, it's cool as hell, but it's still heavy. I love that. And then Doll, bringing in the electronic sounds and the effects to a more traditional hardcore setup for a song, but playing around with the vocals and the filters that they use on the vocals on that, like, the production of that song is just unbelievable. Like, that 3-song stretch is incredible. Like, I love, like, Soul, I love I Care, which sounds almost like a Royal Headache song, which is just crazy. And Brendan has spent a lot of time in this interview circuit telling people he's not a singer. And for anybody who doesn't know the backstory, like, he came up as a drummer. He was a drummer in the legendary hardcore band Trapped Under Ice.
He maybe never used to be a singer, but after this, trust me when I tell you, man, he's a singer.
He sings his ass off on this album, and I Care is one that he just nails that vocal melody. It's so freaking good. Like, Slow Dive, there's nothing like Slow Dive on Glow On. Like, that's a totally different direction. And good Lord, there's nothing as catchy as Time Is Happening on Glow On. Like,
No.
so like these are all like, I just rattled off a bunch of different songs that all have dramatically different feelings to each other. And that's why I like this album more than Glow On. It's more interesting to listen to for me from beginning to end because of all these textures, all these layers, all these different directions you go in. I just think it's such an incredibly like just I wish I had a better word for it, but it's just such a cool album. Like, it sounds great to listen to, and it's so many different settings. I've listened to it at work while trying to concentrate. Listened in my car with the windows down. You know, I've listened on my record player here at home. No matter where I listen to it, this album just sounds impeccable. And so for me, that's why I probably like this album better. I mean, we'll see. Time will tell. Like,
well, and also as more of a layman in the Turnstile world, I think you could make the argument that nothing hits the highs of Mystery into Blackout on
sure,
on Never
nothing
Enough.
on Never Enough, yeah, goes as hard as Blackout does.
But at
Or
the same
TLC.
time, I think, you know, for somebody like me, where I was saying Glow On felt a little bit top heavy to me,
Mhm.
I think this one is just so much more consistent and plays even better as a full work
Yeah,
for my money.
yeah,
And that it's interesting. I hadn't noticed what you were talking about with what they're doing with the set list and mixing the songs up. I wonder if that'll eventually change some of my opinions, where like I
yeah,
Care and Dull will start to belong together in my
yeah,
mind, even though they're not together on the record.
yeah.
You know, that's always the fun part of seeing the bands live and seeing how the set lists evolve and how the songs interplay. It'll also be really fascinating to see how all the legacy material and the Glow On material mixes in with this stuff, because
Yeah,
that'll also that'll tell a lot of stories too, just in
yeah.
terms of how they meld their entire career into set lists.
You know what I think? I think that this band performs so well live. Like, these guys are so in sync when they play live. It's
Which, by the way, is one of the coolest things about Never Enough. Not it's almost like a different part of the band. You know,
Mhm.
they realized, and again, I'm creating fan fiction here, but they
Yeah.
realized that they were never going to be able to do the live thing on the record. So they're like,
Mhm.
all right, we're not even going to try. We're just going to make a super interesting melodic thing, and then the live version will be what it is.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, people who come to these shows because of Never Enough songs that they've heard, you know, the people who saw Seeing Stars and I Care and, you know, Never Enough, they're going to go to these shows and they're going to be swept up in the energy when they play TLC, Real Thing, Generator, you know, Drop, Gravity, like all these like old school classics that when they play these songs just bring the house down and everybody goes nuts. Like, people aren't going to be intimidated by it. When you're there in person and you hear this band play these songs, you're just going to give into it. You're going to fall in love with it. That's my prediction, because I've seen it. Like, if you look for anything, the Brooklyn show they did under the K Street Bridge, look for them performing TLC and just listen to the crowd singing the TLC chorus. And these are a lot of people that are there that, you know, were there for Never Enough stuff, but they got swept up into it. Like, the Turnstile power of those live performances still persists. And if you're enough of a music fan that you want to go and check this out and see this band, I truly believe you're going to get swept up in how great this band performs live.
Yeah, and just as a complete and utter aside before I make my final point about Turnstile, this is ultimately the way I feel about Sleep Token as well, because I've been checking out some videos of their new material, and it hadn't occurred to me how perfectly these songs are constructed for the live show. And oh my goodness, even if you don't like that band and you don't like their music, the way that they're presenting these songs live and the way that they play for their stage show, and theirs is like a intricate dramatic stage show, because they're LARPing as medieval creatures or something. Who knows? But anyway, back to Turnstile. You mentioned.
Well, hang on though, Craig. I do want to know though, how can there be any fans at the show if everybody universally hates Sleep Token?
That's all right. Every show is completely sold out, and people are trying to sell tickets for thousands and thousands of dollars.
It makes no sense. I was told that everybody hates them. Anyway,
right?
Sorry.
But you had mentioned the festival that they played in Spain, and I kind of, while you were talking, I was taking a gander at some of the set lists, and they're opening every show with Never Enough. But did you see what the encore is?
I didn't see it. I did not see that.
All right, here you go.
That show.
This is going to blow your mind.
All right.
The encore has consistently been Mystery, Blackout, Seeing Stars, Birds.
Yeah.
You cannot craft a perfect ending. I got chills just talking about it.
Just killer. It's so good.
So go ahead. Keep criticizing the band. Keep saying that they're not hardcore or that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And then go to the show and have them finish with Mystery, Blackout, Seeing Stars, and Birds. And let me know if that feels good.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, that show was at 3 a.m. local time. They closed the entire festival, and it was at 3 a.m.
Boy, that would violate all the noise ordinances in every major U.S. city.
And like that crowd looked insane. It's just so cool to see this happen. It just gives me so much joy. I just beam with happiness and joy watching these videos of this band just playing these massive crowds.
And let's finish
what
there.
Is ostensibly still hardcore, and they're playing it, and everybody's losing their mind and having a great time, and it's a celebration, and I love it.
I've spent a lot of my life as a critic and looking for things to hate and looking for reasons to not like things, but my God, and I still kind of joke about it, Jimmy Buffett aside. I do it for comedic purposes. It's kind of a bit now, but it's so much more fun to just be a fan and root for these bands to be as successful as they possibly can be. And so just take some joy in it or ignore it. But the criticism is just not fun. It's not worthy of my time.
I love that a lot of these are the same people that then lament that there's no rock music on the radio and like, where's the popular rock bands? It's like, well, you fucking hate all of the popular rock bands. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
man.
And like, you don't have to like a band just because they're popular. Like, like there's, like I said, I do think there's a lot of popular rock bands who are there because they are making the least offensive form of the art that you possibly can. And that's not for me. And whatever, to each their own, more power to you if that's your thing. It's not for me. I think what's really cool and what's really special, like, again, there's just been a few touchstone moments in our life, whether that be like, the Nirvana and Pearl Jam thing happening, like where these artistically credible bands caught the public's attention. It happened again with Radiohead and OK Computer. It happened to some degree with Foo Fighters. Well, I don't know if I need to even qualify that as some degree. I would say it definitely happened for Foo Fighters. Even Metallica,
Tool.
And it hasn't happened in a while. It has been quite a significant amount of time since anybody cared about a Foo Fighters album in any kind of real way. Like,
sure,
it was an excuse for them to go on tour, and then you'd go see them, play all the hits that you want to hear for the most part. And I'm not saying that critically.
Even the Taylor Hawkins tribute album, which was essentially the one his post after he passed away,
right?
Couldn't it?
It just went. It was memory hold, and it's been a long time since a rock band has been around that has made the music world sit up, pay attention, and whether you like it or not, circle an entire discussion of the swirling debates about Turnstile and their place. Like, I'm not confusing this with the days of Pearl Jam and Nirvana. Like,
no,
they're not going to sell 1 million copies of Never Enough in its first week.
That world doesn't exist any more than Nirvana.
Nirvana
couldn't have been the Beatles either. Beatlemania was never going to happen again.
Yep. And yes, thank you for saying that, because like I have seen like a couple people like make this point, like, well, it's all just relative. Like they're not actually that popular.
It is
it's
just
like,
relative.
Well, it is relative to the time we live in. And in the time we live in, for what popularity means in terms of rock music, Turnstile is a enormously popular rock band right now.
A phenomenon.
Yes. And again, like, you don't have to take our word for it. Google it. Go to YouTube. Look at these shows they're playing. Look at these crowds they're performing in front of, and look at the crowds. Like, just watch them react to this music. It's unbelievable. And I think that's sort of just my parting thought. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not here to say like, oh, Never Enough is their okay computer. Like, that's, again, it's a different. We live in a different era from that. But what I think this is an album that, to me, showed that they're up to the task. I think there was a lot of questions, as we waited. I know I've talked about that on this podcast in years past, where I said, man, I just wonder what Turnstile's going to do. Like, what are they going to do to follow up Glow On? It's an impossible task to follow up that album. And what they proved is that they were up for the task. Whether people like it more than or less than Glow On, that's your personal choice. That's fine. But I don't think anybody who's been in on this band would argue that this band was not up to the task of trying to follow that up. And
Turnstile followed what could have been an unfollowable record.
Yep. And I love it. And I'm just so happy it's here. I'm happy for Turnstile Summer. And yeah,
I'm happy for us. Forget that.
Yeah, I am. And like, it's always a little bittersweet when you get to the end of these album cycles. Like, I remember this feeling with Dark Matter, where it was like, oh, now we got to wait 6 years for another Pearl Jam album. And Turnstile historically is not very fast at putting out albums, so we could be waiting another 4 years for another.
Well, they're going to tour album on this for at least 3. So
yeah, and so like, it's like, man, like, I really want to see what's next, but you got to try to remind yourself to just, the album has been out a week. Like, let's sit with this one for a while. Let's see where it lands when all the dust settles. See where this falls on our year-end list and how we feel about it then.
And it's really shaping up to be a phenomenal year in a totally different way than last year was. We've seen Deaf Heaven come back and follow up their last record in a phenomenal way. Turnstiles followed up in a phenomenal way. We've got some new people on the scene. It just always amazes me how different each year can shape up to be. And we do have down years, but this feels like a second up year in a row for us.
It's like such an arbitrary thing, because like, really, what difference does it make? Like, the year is an arbitrary thing. Like, these bands all exist on a never-ending continuum of the timeline of the universe. But having said all that, like, bands do traditionally follow the lunar calendar schedule of, nobody puts out anything from December to like February. Like, nobody puts out. So you got like that natural break. And it is funny how years have their own feeling about the music that comes out in a year. And this year definitely feels way different than last year. Last year was just loaded beginning to end. It was just a nonstop onslaught of amazing albums. This year has not been that, but the highs are hitting really freaking high this year. Like, there has been a handful of albums that I absolutely love this year. And so, got some more on the schedule I'm looking forward to yet this year. Should be a good year. So,
yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening to us talk about Turnstile for over an hour. We hope you're enjoying the record as much as we are. As always, you can find everything we do at albumofrecord.com. We're on the socials. We're on YouTube. We're on everywhere you find your podcasts. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.